quisiera presentarme.
I welcome everybody, our collaborators. My name is Paz Gonzalez. I work with Avina together with Charlotte Scott from SS North. And we believe that this webinar is very important to ensure that the local voices of the young, of the youth, the indigenous people, the women can participate in a more effective way at the time when it's necessary to make decisions. You can click on your channels as well for language. As I was telling you before, you can click on the interpretation icons, and if you have any problems, to click on the language of your selection, please let us know to be able to assist you via the chat so that you can hear the interpretation in your own language. I also would like to introduce our speakers who are going to be sharing with us today. We have 3 speakers today. Firstly, we are going to be able to listen to Andrés Mogro. Andrés is the manager of Avina Foundation. He holds a multilingual degree in business and international exchanges from the Catholic University of Ecuador and a master's degree in international relations from the Andean University Simón Bolívar, and a specialization in leadership and governance of non-governmental organizations. He's also been representing in the international forums and in the United Nations negotiations. We also have 2 other speakers to do with environment. Enrique Becerra, who is the co-founder of Interface Advocacy. He has more than 20 years, almost 20 years of professional experience in the corporate sector in Brazil and abroad. His main skill is the intersection between market intelligence and public policy analysis.
Infraestructura, mercado financiero y tecnología.
In highly regulated sectors, such as electric power sector, infrastructure, financial market, and information technology. He also he promotes the different agendas in the sectors, in different sectors. And he also ran an international governmental relations and corporate communications. He holds a degree in international relations. So Enrique is gonna be sharing together with us.
Interface Advocacy Ambiental.
With Marina, who is also a co-founder. Marina has 15 years of professional experience in Brazil, and she started her career working as an IT person for companies, for different companies for 8 years. And her skill is to manage multi-stakeholder projects involving public, private, and third sectors. Before joining the environmental field, she specialized in advocacy in the health sector. And she also led very successful campaigns. She specializes and she has a degree in international relations and a specialization in Brazilian economics. And this is going to be our pleasure to be able to introduce you to them, because they're going to be sharing with us and they're about the process in advocacy, and we are also giving you the opportunity to share with us through the Jumbo platform, so then you can share with us your questions and comments. And this is the agenda that we would like to share with you today for this time together. we also wanted to allow Charlotte to share with us, but because of a health issue, she won't be able to open her microphone and talk to us. So most probably she will be doing it through the chat. And then we're going to let Andres Mogro to open for us. And then we're going to let Enrique and Marina to share with us the cross of the program. And then we have question and answers. And then we are going to have the privilege of having Yared to share with us some closing remarks. Please, I'm asking you that you rename yourself in your Zoom tag, your name and organization. Make sure your mics are muted. And
vía el box de preguntas y respuestas.
Also, let us make sure that all the questions you do write them in the space that has been assigned for that. Any question, any comment, or any inconvenience you may be facing, please write them down in the chat as well. So having said that, I would like to let Andres share his presentation with us. Thank you so much, Paz. Thank you so much for joining us.
Traducción a diferentes idiomas para hablar en español. Y quiero comenzar.
I'm gonna take this time to impart my opinion, and the first thing is to say thank you for all the collaboration that we have been able to develop with strengthening the voice of this platform. Before we start, I would like to talk about the importance of COP and what the importance it is for the COP every year. And we want the civil society to understand their role in this platform. We need to understand what the goal is so that the decision-making can benefit those who are struggling with this issue globally. And the truth is that most of the time, the decision-making takes place without taking into consideration the needs of the civil society, the needs of those who are affected by this climate change. And one of the things that we are trying to consider and the negotiations we're working on is to be able to make sure that people understand what these needs are and what the true adaptation needs to be. Well, when we talk about when we talk about the global climate change, the goal that is being given is that the poor can continue to be poor and those areas that are affected continue to be affected. And this is why advocacy is so important, because right now about 40,000 to 7,000 people participate in the COP, and around 5,000 people are negotiators. And the 70% of participation comes from the north side of the globe, leaving only a 30% from the south. And we will say that when we look at the globe, it's exactly the opposite. We have more people living in the south than in the north. So what do we need for this to make it look different?
Mucho más a la concentración de la riqueza global. En este contexto, y conversaba con un colega de la India.
In this context, as I was speaking to a colleague from India, he was saying that the South fights this fight with one arm tied to its back. And this is why it's so important to go after a strategy of advocacy that is going to be effective, especially for us who have the privilege to represent the South during these forums. So then we can allow the majority of the population to embrace what they truly deserve. So thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Andrés, por esa introducción y contexto.
Thank you so much, Andrés, for that introduction and for the context that really makes us understand why these kind of strategies are so important in the political forum. I'm going to give the platform now to Enrique to share with us.
I'd like to start thanking Paris and organizing this workshop that is centered around the main mission of our consultancy, Interface Advocacy, that aims to build capacity on advocacy, especially among civil society organizations in the Global South. And this conversation started recently at the Latin American Caribbean Climate Week. So the idea for today is for us to give you an overview on the key stages and aspects of designing our own political advocacy strategies in order to amplify our voices and make a positive impact in different social environmental agendas that we all work on. So thank you very much. It's an honor and a great opportunity for us to talk to you today. And also, just so you know, these initial overview will be on the process and methodologies that Marina and I have perfected during our 20 years of professional experience in the field. And even though the main focus here is on COP28, these methodologies and these step-by-steps can be used by you on your everyday advocacy. It's also at the local and the national levels and other international arena. So we can move on to the next slide. So just briefly giving you a history of our consultancy. As I said, we have a background of more than 20 years of advocacy, government relations, and market intelligence. And while working at the corporate part of advocacy and government relations, we realized quite often that, especially in the Brazilian context, we could benefit civil society organizations working with the environment, with healthcare, and other areas that they needed to perfect the tools, methodologies, and really they could benefit from building capacity so that they could influence the public policies that affect them, and they could be more influential when compared to corporate lobbying that in the Brazilian context, and I believe that this could be also the same in other emerging and developing markets. What we see is that the corporate lobbying is already very professionalized, but often it's not the same with civil society organizations. So we decided to work specifically with this issue. So for today, the next slide, we will give you the agenda of today's meeting. So the first step that we used, and again, this is something that we have perfected in our career. These are general initial steps that we use for every new project that we have. It does is advocacy. If it is for a private client, it's really a step-by-step that we advise you to use on your everyday work. Is first the agenda understanding and setting of what you are defending, what are the objectives. Then we'll talk about the stakeholders and avoidance mapping, the key messages that you should use for each of these types of stakeholders and the fora and the arenas that you will act on, the engagement planning that you should have, and how you should update and keep track of these engagements, and the coalition building and management that is part of these engagement efforts, and the follow-up process and next steps that you have to implement on your daily business, on your daily routine, so that you can make sure that these efforts are successful. And we'll give you also a brief overview of COP28, and I will share with you also some materials that we have that will give you more information on the COP process, the history, what the logistics, and all key information that you would benefit to have regarding COP. So on to the next slide, please. So when we talk about agenda understanding and setting, and obviously we have a diverse audience today, so this might be obvious to some of you or even most of you, but it is important that you have in mind, and this is something that even in the corporate world or very professional advocacy partners that we have, sometimes the objectives of the agenda and the mandate that the negotiators representing these institutions have, it's not very clear. So the first basic step that you have to do inside your own organization is to define the main objectives, define the agenda that you will have, and align this internally. Ideally, have it written, have it discussed internally, and also among your network, your main partners, so that there are no gray zones and this is clear to you what is the end goal. Obviously, especially in complex international negotiations, these objectives might change while you're negotiating. And as we'll talk about later on, you might have to concede and change it, but you always have to have clear in your mind what is the end goal for the short term, for the midterm, and for the long term. You also should know the scope of actions that you as a representative, that you as a negotiator have in order to adapt your position and build a broader consensus whenever it's needed. This needs to be clear, right? Obviously, nowadays we're constantly in contact with our counterparts through WhatsApp and other social media that you can share what's going on, but sometimes you need to know what are your limits, what are your bottom lines in a negotiation, what is the optimum result for it. And this needs to be previously aligned within your institutions and among your partners. And in the same line, as I said, what outcomes are acceptable and what outcomes are not, and what are the tools that you have to influence decision makers that we'll talk more about in the next slide. And also something that is important when thinking about, no, sorry, you can just the last point. It's important for you to understand how this agenda intersects with other agendas and how you can coordinate while representing this topic, these objectives. You will be part of a very complex ecosystem with colleagues and partners negotiating similar agendas that will impact on what you're negotiating. So if you're talking about just energy transition, if you're talking about nature-based services, this and many different complex agenda, you're talking about energy transition, you're talking about climate justice, you're talking about adaptation, about resilience, and so on. And you're just one person. So you will probably have a team or a network that will be present in these other negotiations. And whatever you negotiate in your own limited scope will affect these other negotiations. So it's important that you have a very solid network and that you're informed of what's going on in these other spaces, because that impacts your activity as an advocate. And these answers, obviously, sometimes they are not so clear cut, but the idea is for you to think about these questions and have answers before you go to a negotiations, and you will see that they will change. And it's normal and even ideal that they change, because obviously this is a negotiation, so you need to concede. So we'd like to give you 2 minutes for you to brainstorm and put maybe some of these answers in the Jamboard that it's shared, so then we can get your ideas and get to know you better. And then we will talk about the next step, which is the agenda, and which is the stakeholder mapping. But please go to the link that Paz just shared, and we will give you about 2 minutes or 3 minutes for you to input these answers in this Jamboard. This is going to be useful for us, so that we later on, when we're thinking of a more mid to long term workshop and training, that these answers will be instrumental for us to draft a more detailed workshop later on. So I'll give you the 2 minutes. And also, if you later on, if you want to send we will send you these presentations, and if you want to contribute after, we know that 2 minutes is very, very short time for that.
Gracias, Enrique. Ahí tienen en el chat el link. Pueden
Thank you so
ingresar
much, Enrique. You
y ir
have
dejando
the link in
sus
the chat, and you
respuestas
can
o
click on it and
también
give us
su
your
mirada sobre esta
answers,
primera etapa de
or
un proceso de
even share
advocacy.
with us your point of view.
Vamos a dar un ratito más
We're just going
para
to give
quienes quieran
some
dejar
more
sus
minutes,
aportes.
so that you can share with us your input.
Great. I think we can now move on, and also just please have in mind that
I think that we can, yo creo que podemos
contribute, just to be mindful of the time. We can move on to the next step, which is the stakeholder and arena setting mapping. So how to map key stakeholders and arenas. So what you have to have in mind is that when we're talking about so many negotiations, so many arenas, so many stakeholders that you will come across, it is essential that you organize all of this information systematically, and you organize it. Either it doesn't matter if you do that via an Excel on a Google Sheet, or more institutionalized organizations, you might even have a SAP or Bitrix and other CRM, customer relations and management tools. It is important that you organize yourself and you input this information by type of stakeholders. And what I mean by type, for instance, you can organize them as civil society partners. You can organize them as government representatives, national, local, or international organizations. You can organize them in the categories you use are obviously related to the agenda that you defend, but you should organize them accordingly. Also, the geography is important. the importance and the influence that that stakeholder has on this agenda. Marina will give you a better overview on how to classify these stakeholders according to how influential they are and whether they are supportive or whether they are antagonists on this agenda. But it's important that you think about that and organize that information afterwards. Also, the context details of that person and how close you are to that connection, and how that connection, how that stakeholder is already connected to the other stakeholders. This is on an Excel sheet. This is pretty basic. You just come up with a column of interactions and you just put the cells that contact, that stakeholder is connected to the others. There are many ways of doing that, but just please have in mind that you need to be mindful of data protection laws of your country, that this varies greatly. But for instance, in the European Union and in Brazil, we already have very strict data protection laws. So be mindful of the data protection laws of the country. And a great tool that we have to find some of these answers, for instance, how influential that person is, and if that person is supportive of the agenda that you're defending or is an antagonist, is through social media, LinkedIn, or even Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. There are so many social media nowadays, but this is a great source of information about the position of the stakeholder and how influential the stakeholder is for your agenda. And as I said, I think that also these international negotiations, they involve a very complex web of arenas and interactions. So, and many of these interactions that you have complementary mandates, issues to global issues, because when we're talking about climate, when we're talking about environment, it's all a mix of this. So this is why it's important for you to organize these organizations and these informations. And when we talk about COP is just, it's a major brick on this wall of climate negotiations and biodiversity protections, and so all of these agendas that are discussed there. But these discussions and these agendas, the COP is the place where hopefully you harmonize the national policies that affect and interact with that. So it's a great opportunity, but this is a long-term process as well. So you need to understand that these engagements, these interactions that you have at the local level, at the national level, and also at other international arenas, they will be very beneficial to you. And we obviously, when we're talking about urgent issues, we have this urgency, we want quick results. But what often happens is that these results and these agendas that we set are for the mid to long term. So build these relationships at the local level, build these relationships at the national level, and think of the mid to long term. This is very important, especially when we're talking about the long-term engagements that we will talk about in the next slide. But for now, we'll give you a few minutes to also write about how you do on your day-to-day work, the stakeholder and the arena mapping in the Jamboard, so that we can move on to the next step.
Muchas gracias, Enrique. Nuevamente pueden acercarse al Jamboard, ir a la
Thank you so much,
segunda hoja
Enrique. You can also go to the
y
Jamboard
dejar sus aportes
and you can leave your
en
contributions. You
cualquiera
can
de
write
los idiomas
your
que
inputs
ustedes
in
se sientan más
any of
cómodos.
the language you feel more comfortable.
Charlotte, si podés mostrar la segunda hoja, step 2.
Charlotte, could you please show the second slide, please?
Gracias.
Thank you.
Como comentábamos al principio, sus
As
aportes
I was saying
van a
at the
servir
beginning,
para
your inputs are going
em,
to
enfocar
be useful to
nuestras actividades y
focus
aportes
our activities
para el siguiente año.
for the next year.
Si les parece bien, mientras tanto podemos ir avanzando con el tercer
If
paso.
you agree, maybe we can continue with the third step, if you all agree.
Enrique, do you want to go through the next step?
I will continue, but I don't see the presentation. Okay, now I see it. The next slide,
Thanks.
please. So after you planned and mapped your stakeholders, it may be that you have a huge number of stakeholders mapped and you start planning your engagement activities. So one important thing is that you remember that you need time to cement these relationships. So choose a number of stakeholders to initiate your engagement, a number that is according to your availability, a number of people that you can sustain over time and nurture this relationship over time. It's not beneficial when you start a relationship and soon enough you have to leave it behind because you didn't have time to continue, nurturing the relationship. Something very important when you meet someone is that you present yourself, your initiative, your interests in a powerful way, in a way that connects to your initiative. So write down a script before you contact them to make sure you're very sharp on the way you deliver the messages. And also something very important is that you know beforehand, know before engaging with these stakeholders, what is your goal? Or in other words, what is the best scenario that could happen from that engagement activity? So with some stakeholders, we engage with them just to inform them about something, or with others, we have to neutralize a crisis. With some stakeholders, we want to make sure they understand well the situation or the scenario because they are our spokespeople. And with others, we are maybe trying to convince them to become, persuading them to become one of our champions that will lead the campaign. So make sure you know beforehand what you're expecting. And it's important to be very objective, very transparent when you engage with a stakeholder. And the most important part is that you are able to make bold requests. And sometimes we get shy when we meet a stakeholder, especially when it's a very influential stakeholder. And, we sometimes get shy and don't make our requests, or we make it in such a, discreet way that they don't really get what we need. So it's very important that they have a very clear vision of what is your need, what you're inviting them to do. And so make sure you make the requests in a very clear way. Next slide, please. So a very common mistake when we're planning our engagement is, the next, please. So a common mistake when we're engaging or starting to engage with stakeholders is that sometimes we tend to engage with people that are like-minded, or people that are natural allies, people we have a an easy connection with. And to avoid this, I encourage you to draw a stakeholder matrix where you can analyze each of your stakeholders by two main, most important, let's say, point of views, which is their power to influence in one hand and their interest in your initiative in the other hand. So as Henrique said, nowadays we have a lot of resources to study and analyze our stakeholders through social media and doing internet research, we can understand more or less or have a notion of where they might be on this matrix. So all of these stakeholders, whatever they are positioned, they may be important and relevant, but we want to make sure we prioritize the stakeholders that have high power of influence and also a high interest in our cause or our project. And it may be that oftentimes it changes during the project, during the campaign. So it's nice to have this stakeholder matrix so that we can analyze over time where the stakeholders are moving. So a stakeholder that had a lower interest in our initiative, after some engagement activities, can grow and have a high interest. So it's important that you stop to analyze your stakeholders over time. And it's also very important to study the attitudes and the needs of our stakeholders. We're going to talk about this soon when we talk about coalition, but it's also important, it's very important to make sure you know their interests, their behaviors, and their needs. Next slide. Another very important, sorry, before we move, I think we should have to stop, right? 2 minutes on the previous step.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to engagement planning. And please give your contributions on the Jamboard.
Just a quick note. I think this step right now should be engagement planning. How you do the engagement planning if you use these tools. Yeah.
I think we can go back to the presentation now, to the next step. So after planning your engagement activities, the next step is building your messages. So a very important aspect of advocacy is the ability to deliver strong messages in a persuading way, in a way that moves people, to work with you and support your initiative. So here is a very brief step-by-step on how you develop or build strong key messages, because this is like the basis, the foundation of your campaign, right? So the first step is to create a powerful call to action, which is an impelling and clear message that moves people to act in favor of your initiative or cause. So the call to action needs to be like very straightforward message that has an action on it, right? An action that easily translates what you expect people to do in favor of your initiative. Then you develop 3 or 4 key messages that will be delivered in all your engagement activities. And I say 3 or 4 messages. I don't say much more than 5, let's say, because this is like the mantra, the call to action and the key messages, they must be the mantra of your campaign. So everyone involved should repeat the same messages, especially if you're advocating in a coalition. It's not strategic that everyone in a coalition has a different message. No, that everyone has to repeat the same set of messages. And that's why they need to be easy to get, crystal clear, very straightforward. Then you elaborate proof points for your key messages. And the proof points, this is where you need to dig in and get data, scientific evidence that support your key messages. And this is how you elaborate the key messages during your meetings with stakeholders. And very important is to train your spokespeople. It's a very basic, step of the communication part of the campaign is that you train, you rehearse, so that you make sure everyone is repeating the same thing and your messaging is consistent. Another very important tip is that you adapt your messages according to your stakeholder, and adapting doesn't mean changing. So what I mean by adapting is that you show an angle of the messages that connects the most with that stakeholder. And that's why it's important to study their behaviors, their needs and interests before you meet them. So we can stop now, 2 minutes to get your inputs.
Bien, si prefieren dejar sus aportes vía chat, es otra opción.
If you prefer to leave your comments on the chat, that's also an option.
Thank you for your contributions. Let's move on. So a very important aspect of advocacy is the coalition building and management. We have observed that advocacy campaigns that are led by coalitions, they tend to have more success than advocacy initiatives led by a person or one organization. Now it's, as the African proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Managing a coalition can be very time consuming because oftentimes there are conflicts, there are issues within the coalition, but I strongly recommend that you try to advocate as a coalition instead of advocating individually or by organization. And some very quick steps and points of attention when starting or managing a coalition is that after you initiated your stakeholder engagement activities, stop after some time to analyze if you have developed a consistent or critical mass of allies and potential champions or spokespeople. And if you haven't, you need to invest more time engaging with your stakeholders until you identify a minimal number of allies to start developing your coalition. Then it's important to identify and map how much resistance you have to manage as a coalition. Within the coalition and outside the coalition, it's very important to have it very well identified and mapped because you need to dedicate some time for this to neutralize or overcome resistance. And make sure you invest time on cementing the relationships with the allies and the champions, because coalitions need time to take shape. And here that's why I said in the planning engagements that it's important for you to know the interests and the needs of your allies or stakeholders in general, but here especially in the interests of your allies, of your coalition, because this is the ability that makes you, the information that makes you a good negotiator, right? So in coalitions, oftentimes we need to exchange, give something to receive something in return. So if you know the needs, the interests of these allies, it's easier to negotiate with them and have success in your initiatives as an advocate. Next, please. So when managing the coalition, it's important to be transparent. Make sure you send the same messages for the different parts and members of your coalition. It's a very important step to be very transparent and consistent with your communications and maintain a good pace of communication and engagement with the members of the coalition. If you say hello every 3 months, you're probably not going to cement strong relationships in the mid-long term. And as Henrique said in the beginning, these projects tend to be long-term projects, mid to long-term projects. So make sure you nurture these relationships with some consistency and don't chase them just when you need it, because this is a common mistake. And study the attitudes and the needs of the members of the coalition. As I said before, make sure you know their interests. And a very important thing to remember is that coalitions may have members with very different interests and still have a fantastic team play. It's not important that, let's say, it's not critical that all the members of your coalition have the same interests. You need to have the same goal, the same vision, but it may be the reason why you got together varies among the members of the coalition. And this is not a problem. It's important that we have this diversity, because the diversity within the coalition makes it more representative and does make it more impactful when it comes to advocating for your necessities and your goals. Let's pause here to get your contributions.
Sí, quizás no hay aportes en este instante. De todas maneras,
Thank you so
el
much,
Jamboard
but
quedará
there are
abierto
no comments
para que
at
puedan
this moment,
completarlo
and
cuando se
we
sientan
Jamboard is
will
going to
leave
be
que tienen
open,
más
this
disponibilidad de
so
tiempo.
you can
the
add
Si les
your
parece, Marina y
input
Enrique,
whenever you
podemos avanzar con
want.
la
Marina and
presentación
Enrique, if you
Maybe we can
think,
continue with the
if it is okay
presentation.
with you, we could continue with the presentation.
Sure. So let's go to the next slide on follow-up. So the follow-up process is very important. It's a very strategic moment of the engagement when we are engaging our stakeholders on the advocacy initiatives. So after each meeting you had, make sure you send a thank you note where you summarize the next steps you have agreed during the meeting. And very common that our stakeholders are busy people. They see a lot of people every day, so they may forget, you know, what you agreed, what you said are going to be the next steps of your initiative. So make sure you make their lives easier by sending a note where you register this and it's there. It's also important to make sure you have a spreadsheet, or if you have a CRM tool, you can use it. But if you don't, just make sure you have a spreadsheet where you register the name of the stakeholders, when you met them, and the results of the engagement you had with them, because we're going to forget this over time. So it's nice to have it registered somewhere where you can consult and make sure the next time you meet a stakeholder that you have already engaged in the past, make sure you read the notes and you remember whatever you said or agreed during the initial meeting. And it's very important to be consistent on your approach to the stakeholders. As I said, don't come and look for them just when you need. Make sure you have some consistency in getting in touch with a certain frequency. And remember to follow up. I can't stress enough how much it is important to follow up. And oftentimes, because we lack time or because we think this is inconvenient, we don't follow up. But it's nice to, you know, hold people accountable for what they said they were going to deliver. So if you need to send a note and ask them, you know, remind them of what they said or they promised during your meeting, it's important to do so. Okay, so we can stop here, see if you have some contributions. Just another note for you to remember. That's why we said in the beginning, it's important that you have clarity of your goal with them before you meet, so that you can, you know, identify next steps according to your needs. So, okay, let's move on. I think now, Henrique again.
Great. Thank you so much, Marina. And again, if you all can contribute, it would be very important for us to get to know you better and to understand what are the procedures that you already do, the procedures that you think you could do differently, and also
Las cosas que pueden hacer
aprendemos
diferente.
que podemos hacer
Y también
diferente
eso es
y
basado en
podemos
nuestra
aprender de la
experiencia.
experiencia y ustedes de la nuestra.
También tenemos mucho que
También nosotros podemos
aprender de
aprender mucho de
ustedes.
ustedes.
Y
advocacy, environmental advocacy, social justice advocacy for many, many years. So we also learn a lot from you. So your contributions will be very helpful. We can go to the next slide, and I will share. So we wanted, obviously, our eyes are on COP right now. It starts within 2 weeks. So I will share with you, but afterwards, I believe Paz will share the actual PDFs with you
Eu
about
vou agora já dizer que eu vou compartilhar os PDFs
state
à l'Université d'Arizona.
They are the
California,
por la de
en
Carolina del Sur.
Carolina del Norte, perdón, pueden ver la agenda.
Y en estos documentos podemos ver la agenda oficial de manera bastante fácil.
just 2 days ago made this very interesting, informative workshop about the history of COP, the very detailed description on the structure of UNFCCC, the different governing bodies, the different constituted bodies. They also give a great overview of the logistics of the COP, strategies on how best to engage with the parties, with the diplomats that are representing the parties, when you should do that, how you should do that, how you should follow up. And it's all very focused at the COP process. So we believe this is very complementary on what we're discussing today. As I said in the beginning, this is really to give you an overview of the everyday step-by-step methodologies that we use for advocacy at the local, at the national, and at the international levels, because they are pretty similar. But the COP environment, it's very complex, it's very unique. And so I advise you all to take a look, especially at the presentation that gives you this broader overview of the COP process. They will also soon provide us with the video of the workshop. So I advise you all to have a look. I won't take much time to talk about the COP context, because there is a lot of information there. But just be mindful and research the historical context of the COP, how it was made, all of this complex web of organizations and institutions that were set since the late 70s up to the Paris Climate Accords on 2015. You will see that, as I said, there is many different organizations, many different arenas where countries, civil societies, local, state governments, where academia, where the private sector, where civil society engage. But obviously the main focus of the COP is centered around what nation states will negotiate on all of these different agendas that affect the climate and biodiversity. But we see the COPs in itself as a great and unique opportunity for us, all of the non-state actors or non-party stakeholders, to influence the outcomes of these negotiations, to build connections, to build ambitions, and to strengthen the consensus around the agendas that we defend, that we support. So if you are going to COP, we can go to the next slide. Of course, sometimes you can even get frustrated by how are you going, or your institution gonna influence the outcomes of the negotiations of 200 countries. But again, we need to think that this is for the long term. And a lot of the value is just to build these connections, to learn from these connections, and afterwards follow these steps and focus on what are the next steps. How can you go beyond that? Because every year there's a different COP. So you can always focus on right now, but you can also always look to the mid and to the long term. Be prepared for the flood of meetings, the very tight agenda, and a lot of on-the-spot engagement opportunities. So this is why it's very important to align your agenda internally inside your institutions and on your coalitions, to have this stakeholder mapping and to have the events mapped, because it's going to be very hectic. And don't worry if you find an opportunity for a unique engagement. Yes, you're gonna maybe not be able to go to an event or another, but keep an open mind for that. Strengthen the network so that you're aware of what's going on and you spot last-minute opportunities. But don't lose sight of your priorities. have it clear, and also be mindful of your well-being. Sleep, eat. Sometimes eating is a challenge, but be mindful of that. Your brain needs to be working well so that you can perform well. And also be mindful of cultural differences. And as Marina said, make sure you get your message across. Make sure you your counterpart, or make sure the person that you're negotiating understands what you're saying, because this is often the case that the other person doesn't get what you're saying very clearly, either because of language barriers or most common cultural barriers. And I wanted to end with some encouragement words. In the face of complex discussions, stay resilient, stay focused. Our work is not only about policies and agreement, but it's about, in the end of the day, securing a better future for our communities around the globe. So keep pushing forward, and may our efforts lead to transformative change. We know we're dealing with a climate emergency. I'm right now in the south of Brazil, and there's extreme floods happening while I speak. I don't know if you heard of the thunderstorms. We have the biggest heat wave happening in the north and the center of Brazil, where Marina is. So we are clearly living through an emergency. So our work is essential for us to build resilience and adapt. So thank you very much for this opportunity again, and we're looking forward for our next conversations. So thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Enrique y Marina.
Thank you so much, Enrique and Marina.
Disculpen, voy a cambiar.
I'm going to change now.
Creo que ahora no debería haber problemas con mi audio.
I think that now
Muchas gracias por esta presentación. La verdad que
we're not going to have problems with my audio anymore. As I was listening to you, I could distinguish what needed to be improved, the changes that needed to be made in this process. And also in the chat, I was able to find out more about the work that you do. And now I would like to take time to go into questions and answers. So I invite you to write your contributions and opinions in the box of questions and answers, including the chat. That's another option, so we can read them. We have a comment by Celia, who says that she's interested in participating because she's working in the forest field,
trabajando para fortalecer
in the jungle.
las estrategias de advocacy, así que
so she's very interested in following the strategies for advocacy. So we encourage you to do a follow-up through our network and emails. We have a question. I'm going to try to translate it. How can we evenly distribute the opportunities for those marginalized, vulnerable
espacios y foros internacionales
people in order to participate in COP? So Enrique or Marina, if any of the two of you could give an answer to that.
My perspective is that obviously let me just look at, oh, here we are. Is that obviously, as we've mentioned before, Andres mentioned before, there is a huge lack in representation at COPs. This COP in particular, we all know that the global north is much more represented than the global south. You have a lot of corporate lobbying represented that some of them are even part of the problem and not the solution. So this is a major challenge. And I believe that institutions like Fundación Avina have a very strong word in building this capacity among different groups of civil society, such as those that you mentioned. What I see is that the spaces are increasing for this participation, but there is still a long way to go. And a good way for civil society to increase its participation is through social pressure, is through media attention, it's through always making the case that, for instance, indigenous communities, they are just 5-6% of the world population, but they protect more than 80% of biodiversity. This is a fact that it's known for a long time, but I personally didn't know this until last year. And this is something that really calls people's attention. Like here in Brazil, we have a major issue of protecting our indigenous populations and their territories. And most Brazilians don't understand why it is so important, right? And when you come up with this very strong slogans, people understand the importance. And when people understand the importance, you create demand for participation of these groups. It's unfortunately, these spaces are very self-interest centered. So until politicians and understand that their voters, their electorates in democracies, or their populations are mindful of these issues and understand the importance of the participation by these stakeholders, until that is the case, we won't have a broader participation and equal participation. So my take on this is we need to work with the wider public. We need to convince the people that don't understand yet the importance of having indigenous people, or having women leading discussions, of having the periphery in our cities leading these discussions. Why have the people who are in the peripheries of our mega cities present there? Because they are the ones that are suffering the first impacts of climate change. This is obvious to most of us, but it's not obvious to most of people. So we need to work on the messaging.
Muchas gracias, Enrique. Tenemos otro aporte.
Thank you so much, Enrique. We have another contribution by Martin. He says, I am talking on behalf of the African youth, and in COP we have had so many injustices. He says that in COP 28, the leader who was able to finally get the permission to attend, he could not raise the funding to go. And one of the big problems that we face is corruption at a government level. So we need to ensure the participation of family members. They ensure the participation of family members and government people, but that hinders the participation of the young. And we need to ensure that we can reverse that, so that they can also have their space for contribution, and to make sure that the part of funding can stop being a barrier or a hindrance.
I'm not sure
If
if
Enrique or Marina would like
wants
to share
make a comment
about
on
where to
financing.
access to finances.
The representation of the South, the Global South, on these international forums. And it could be an opportunity to unite people and develop a campaign. And I think maybe a key point here is to understand the behaviors of the stakeholders. Who are the decision makers around this process? What are their needs, their interests, how you could influence them? It's not an easy process, but these kind of changes, they take the time, they're time consuming, they need effort, but it's a cause, it's absolutely worth that we as civil society invest on. So my bet is this could be a good exercise, an important exercise on practicing coalition building and management.
And if I can add, Martin, I mean, the need is urgent, right? And the problem is urgent. So a good way to work around some of these urgent issues is to map what are the international organizations that provide means for young leaders of the Global South. There are, I won't say many because we all want much more of that, but there are a few institutions that are already active on it. And you can escape this local problem, as you're saying, that maybe there are issues of corruption, etc. So don't rely on just one source of support, because unfortunately these issues are not specific to your country, they are global. Just so try to map what are the international institutions, what are the coalitions that work on the causes that you are working, and try to get their support so that you have this space and you have their platform. We all know the challenges, and there's not enough financial support, but that's what we can do today.
Gracias, Enrique. Tenemos otra pregunta que llegó.
Thank you, Enrique. We have another question.
Tenemos una mano levantada.
And also we have someone with a raised hand. I will read the question first. Which are the best practices available to contextualize the COP in a specific context?
You know, like, as I said, in the end of the day, I believe that the COP process is an institutionalized space that the world has created to discuss the environmental common goods that we all depend on, right? But these issues, they are global, but they are local. So if I got your question right, I don't see, like, whatever, if we're talking about, as I said, nature-based services. These services are provided in the local mangrove. They are provided in the local forests. They are provided at the local level. So the way that you have to regionalize these discussions is understand the tools that are negotiated, the policies that are negotiated at COP, and make sure that your government, your national government, is implementing whatever is agreed in these different agendas at the local level. Because this system is very complex. Nations will go, they will pledge. Oh yes, everyone agreed. This needs to be agreed via consensus. That's why it's so challenging for us to have one final text for each of the agendas, because they need to be agreed by everyone. So once you have the agreement, then you need to make sure that your government will make it into national law. And then you have to make sure that this is trickled down to the local level, right? So we all need to make sure, and you need to pressure our governments first to come to a compromise and agree with the agendas that we defend. But secondly, and as important as, or even more important, is to make sure that our governments then implement whatever is agreed. So that's how you're gonna contextualize what is agreed at COP. That sometimes it's so general, it's hard to take that into the local level, but we as civil society, we need to make sure that these things are brought to the local level, because that's where reality is.
Just to add something, I'm not sure I got this question completely, but I think you referred, when you said local context, I think it had to do not only with government, but other stakeholders. That's what I also got from this question. And if this is the case, I think, as we mentioned during the slide presentations, it's important to make sure you know what are the interests and needs of this the stakeholders you're dealing with in your local context. So if it's a civil society organization, or if it's the media, or a group of professionals, just make sure you know their interests. And among all the issues that were discussed at COP, what are the issues that really impact their day-to-day, and really get their buy-in and their investment of time on that.
Gracias, Marina. Estamos llegando a...
Thank you, Marina. We're almost finished, but I can see one raised hand. Anawana Alibandila.
Anawana, ¿querías hacer un comentario?
Did you want to make a comment? Anawana?
Yes, my name is Anawana, Executive Director of Kalimutu, based in Senanga, western part of Zambia. My comment is, I have been in this voice of climate action for some time now, and I've been going around the villages, and I've seen how people are suffering there. There is this lack of knowledge deep in the villages there. People don't really know exactly how they can challenge this climate change happening around. So, and I've noticed that there is the need of people learning. People need to be taught. So it's high time we made that voice to come up. So I'm really enjoying this program. I enjoy it very much because I'm always in the fields. I always go in the fields, visiting the locals, and really would want to see and come against this challenge of this climate change. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Buena. Tenemos también la mano levantada.
You can also see Martin with his hand raised. Martin, maybe you also want to make a comment?
Hello.
Sí.
Am I audible now? All right. Thank you so much for actually giving me this time. Just actually want to re-echo more on the message that actually I wrote. I don't know if people are able to get me.
Sí, te escuchamos.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah. First and foremost, just actually to just appreciate you for the important webinar that actually you've brought about as we also prepare for COP28. These engagements are very much important, and in one way or the other, you are just not actually speaking to us, but you are speaking to the global, because we also expect that once we attend this kind of programs, we are also able to share knowledge with our audience that we have. However, speaking about COP28, I've just come to understand, actually come to my knowledge. When I was in the university in Rome, I used to see these were the injustices actually which were happening in Africa, but I never actually took so much attention to it. But you agree with me in one way or the other that we have been having COP each and every time. There was COP26, COP27. Now this is COP28 and the rest of the COPs that we've been having. Look at Africa, where we are at the moment. The challenge is actually getting worse. There is no much work.
Creo que te perdimos, Martín.
Which as we speak at the moment, the impacts of climate change is just increasing each and every time. But we've got people in one way or the other who goes to such kind of events to go and represent the nation, to go and represent the continent, but their impacts are not being felt. But because of the corruption which is been happening, because each and every time we hear the United Nations have given so much billions to this country in regards to climate change, but that money, the way it is being used, it is not the way it's supposed to be used or to the intended purposes. But because of corruption with our own politicians, their money are being pocketed. And as we have this kind of COP28, which is coming out, I was actually at the ministry here in our country, where I have seen some of the people who are not even supposed to go for COP are the ones who are going. So now it's actually a challenge. And if we don't, in one way or the other, put a stop to it, at the end of the day, all our efforts would just go in vain. It's high time, please. We need your help in one way or the other on how best this kind of issues can stop. Because where we are going, I don't see an 5 years from now, Africa is going to be worse than the way it is at the moment. So please, this is actually my remarks that I actually wanted just to give out. And to those who are going for COP28, all the best. Otherwise, we'll definitely be watching you, because we couldn't actually manage to make it, hoping for the sponsors to come through before 2027. Thank you.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you
Martín.
so much, Martin. While I was listening to him, I was thinking of something very important. This advocacy process presented by Marina and Enrique, it's important to also adapt it, not only thinking of COP, but also in our own context and countries, because the advocacy starts in our territory. And Martin and others were mentioning the thing of corruption, the lack of financing and opportunities. These are huge barriers. And I think this process, the advocacy process, is to generate partnerships and coalitions, help to revert the situation, or at least that's what we hope for. Enrique, Marina, I'm not sure if you would like to share a last reflection with us before we close the session.
I'd like to thank you again, Paz, International Union, and all the partners for giving us this opportunity. And a special thank for Martin and Anawana, who gave your contributions for us. As Paz said, I mean, we always need to start at the local, and we have such a diverse set of scenarios. Climate change is not affecting everyone the same way. Most vulnerable communities are the ones who are paying the highest price. There's a huge injustice on that. We are very aware. What we're trying to provide is the tools for you that work based on our context, which is a very specific context of global South democracy that is Brazil, also based on other experiences that we had in other countries. But these tools, we understand that they can be applied in many places, but not everywhere. So it's very important for us also to get inputs and feedbacks from people that are in other contexts that are facing different challenges, so that we can learn from these different approaches. This is an emergency. We're all on it. We're all working and giving our lives in dedication to this. But yes, we're all facing very different challenges and problems, and we all have to learn from each other. So thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It was a great pleasure to meet you all. I have huge admiration for your work, and I wish you success in your endeavors, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you, Paz.
Muchas gracias a ustedes por participar, por acceder a compartir este.
Thank you so much to all to be part, to share this moment with us, and for your participation, and also to share your knowledge with the group. I would like to thank also to everyone who is participating, as well as the interpreters that allowed us to have this conversation. This is one of the barriers that we're overcoming, which is communication or language. I am going to share with you on the chat box the link of Interface Advocacy Ambiental, which is the organization that was founded by Enrique and Marina. For those who would like to know more about this organization, And now I'm going to give the floor to our representative of South North, who is the one who made this event possible today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paz, for this, and thank you everyone for attending this session. I understand the frustration in terms of the attendance to COP and the voices of the Global South. It's not at this probably step or stage should be, which is still needs strengthening. But I think probably we just need to look at what are the opportunities. Yes, we understand the barriers, but let's look at the opportunities and what are the breakthrough. And I'm hoping for those who are traveling to COP, travel well, and thank you for the presenters, and thank you, Avina and other colleagues. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Muchas gracias y estaremos compartiendo.
Thank you so much, and we will be sharing the presentation and the recording of this event later on.
Hasta luego.
Until next time, thank you.